The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with the Zig Zag Man. Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland. And as you know, if you listen to the show, I have prided myself in getting the most interesting guests on the planet. And I've got a newbie today, first time. Heather, how are you?
I'm good, Ralph. How are you?
Good. How do you pronounce your last name?
Ryan, R-Y-A-N.
Okay, Ryan.
Yep.
That should be easy to me.
Pretty straightforward, yep.
We were talking off air. You're from New York. I'm from New York. Your parents were from Queens,
yep.
And Jackson Heights, as a matter of fact, and so am I. And
that's cool.
And so we experienced a lot of the same growing up type thing in New York. Heather, the reason you're here, we both lost a friend, an irreplaceable friend, recently in Mark Littell. And as people know, Mark wrote the foreword for my book. He was, I was the TOPS representative in the 80s and 90s. When he was coaching, after his career, he was coaching amateur ball and pro ball. And I got to meet him in Stockton, California in, must have been 1990, 90 or 89. And
wow.
We hit it off tremendously. He was a cool guy. Tell me how you knew him and what your memories of him are.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just met him last year on Facebook, and it all came about because I saw a post he had made to a baseball group about Thurman Munson. It was a little vignette about meeting him under the stands at Yankee Stadium, and I read it and I thought, wow, this is a really well-written little bit. And I remembered his name because I remembered seeing him pitch with the Cardinals against the Mets. You remember that, right? You're a Mets fan, I guess.
Oh, yeah, I am indeed. And I also remember his pitching against the Yankees, against Chambliss in that.
Right.
And, you know, when I think about him, that was a big baseball deal. That was like, you know, that could have been something that stuck with him for his lifetime. And that's what I admired about him. He shook it off and went on to have a productive life. And God, I miss him terribly.
Yeah.
Tell me how were you a Yankee fan?
No, I was a Mets fan. So I would go to Shea, and I liked the Cardinals of that era, so I would go and watch them, and that's how I remember him. I mainly remember, you know, Hernandez and Ted Simmons earlier, and but when I saw his name, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if it's the same guy, and it turned out that yes, it was the same guy, and so I looked him up and found that he had written 3 books. So I thought, wow, that's really cool. Because I'm a baseball book collector. I have like 1,000 baseball books. And
well, you'll have to give me your address, and I'll send you one of my copies of one of my books.
Oh, sure. That'd be great.
A copy of the book I wrote. How about that?
All right.
Which is the best I can do right now at one, but I've got another in the hopper. And so you love baseball. Let me ask you this. What was your first memory of baseball when you were young?
I guess it was the '69 Mets. I was 6. And
okay.
We didn't really have the access to the games that people have nowadays. As you remember, we didn't have like wall-to-wall TV and internet and everything. So we mainly found out about it through the papers and, listening on the radio. And the big ticker tape parade was very impressive. And so that was where I first started to figure it out. But my parents were not really into baseball. My dad had played football in high school, but he wasn't really a big baseball fan. So once I got into baseball around that age, they gradually became baseball fans too, and they became even bigger fans than I did. So that's where I started, and then Rusty Staub was a big hero of mine. Jerry Koosman, all the old Mets.
Oh yeah.
But I never liked the Yankees. I never paid any attention to the Yankees because I hated the Yankees. So I didn't even remember Mark's home run, giving up the home run to Chambliss, so that I only remember him from the Cardinals era.
Oh, okay. Well, it's all this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
What changed in baseball as you see it? What between then and now, for the good and for the bad?
That's a loaded question.
Well, I'm a little loaded myself, but that happens.
Well, let's see. First of all, I don't really have any. I guess maybe the best way to start is to just say what I feel about it. I don't really have any big feelings about the National League getting the DH, but I do have feelings about the guy on second base in the extra innings. I find that very offensive. But other than that, I'm not like too much of a baseball purist, So
okay.
I think what has changed is just the fan experience has changed a lot, because I remember we used to go to games a lot at Shea, and they weren't that expensive. And everything was.
Heather, I remember. Let me tell you a story. I played hooky from high school in 1964 to 9 of my friends went to, or 19, I don't remember the number. We all sat in the right field grandstand for $1.25, and that was the opening day of Shea Stadium.
Wow!
Against the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I still have close friends from that day. Marty Rose, in particular, who's a podcaster on this network and was my childhood friend. He and I sat there and inaugurated the Mets. They had moved from the Polo Grounds. This was probably before you had any inkling of baseball. And it was an exciting day. So what did you like about Shea? Well,
it was pretty no frills. I mean, compared to the ballparks today, compared to Citi Field. But so that was kind of, it was kind of sparse in that way. But I liked the atmosphere. It seemed to have a very light atmosphere as opposed to Yankee Stadium, which I've been to a few times, and I haven't been to the new one. But I hear it's got the same kind of dark, dismal, dour quality that the old one had.
Spoken like a true Met fan.
Met fan, I know, right? Yankees suck. Anyway, so yeah, we liked Shea because it just had a very nice atmosphere, and the fans were agreeable and fun. This is when the Mets were really terrible, and when I really started going to games, it was in the 70s and early 80s. I went to a lot of games, and of course the Mets were not very good, and the fans there were the real diehards, and they have a different attitude than the ones who are the front runners, obviously. So they were not booing. They were not booing anybody on their own team like some Mets fans do today, which I find very offensive.
The society has changed so much.
That also has changed.
Yeah. people's loyalties have changed. Politically, people are making decisions that are absolutely crazed. And,
right.
I just, for my kid, for all kids, I hope this turns into a better world than I fear it's becoming.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one. And Mark, even though he was far to my right, and I got along pretty well politically. I mean, he didn't. Anyway, I never explained. I never explained how I got to be friends with him. Anyway, so I'm writing a novel about a pitcher who it's set in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, because that's the period where I was really immersed in baseball, and I have a lot of memories of that era. And he also has ADHD. So when I met Mark online, and he started to talk to me about his background and his books and everything, and it turned out that he also has ADHD, and he was a pitcher. In that era, I said, "Hey, could you help me out with this book? Could you kind of be like my advisor, because I need somebody to kind of verify certain things that I want to do in terms of baseball, and also just to tell me what it would be like to be a pitcher in that era with ADHD." And he said, "Yeah, sure." So that's how we got to talking a lot. And he read some of my stuff and made comments, and we were working on that. Then he started sending me his stories for his latest book. And
tell me about some of those, because unfortunately, unless you can step in and help, his writings of that book may not reach us.
Well, yeah, that's my big concern. Well, I mean, so far it's about 3/4 done. He and I worked on it very diligently over the past several months. And I edited his stuff, and he, would call like every day, and we'd work on things. But anyway, so we've gotten it almost done, which is one of the things that was so hard about losing him, was that he's so close to being finished, So that's a regret that I have every day. It's like, maybe I should have pushed him more. But, he was not feeling well. He had health problems, and he didn't strike me as the kind of guy who would be easily pushed either. So I just held off and let him sort of do it in his own time. And he'd send me stuff when he'd done it and call me and work on it when he felt like it. So, but anyway, I think we can get it done. I spoke with his wife, Sana, and she agrees with me that it should be published. So I'm working on pulling it together for publication and getting some of his former teammates and friends to chime in and tell stories about him. And I already have several folks that I've talked to, and I'm going to talk to some more and add that on to kind of fill out the length. But I think it will work as a book.
Who are these friends? I want to know if we have any mutual people that, if Mark and I had any mutual people that worked on, mutual friends that worked on the book.
Oh, well, nobody's really worked on it yet, but they've just talked to me and
who
interviewed them about
to
it.
The book?
Jim Wolford was an old friend of his from very early days playing in instructional league. A fellow named Bill Franciscus, whom he went to Cuba with and did a stint in Cuba.
A coach. Yes.
Yep, as a coach in the late, I mean, it was fairly recent. I guess it was 2018, 2019, something like that. Let's see, who else I have. Oh, John Matlack, who he met while he was coaching and was friends with him.
Oh, one of my favorite all-time Mets.
Yeah, I know. One of mine, too. He was just a really cool guy. And
they called him Gentleman Jim.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Gentleman Jim Matlack.
Yep.
And he was a classy stand-up guy.
That's what Mark said.
I got to meet him in my Tops endeavor. He was either a roving coach or a pitching coach in the minors with San Diego, if I'm not mistaken. And,
Yeah, I think that's where they met.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the first thing Mark was talking about him, and I said, "How did you meet him?" Because you weren't, playing with him on a team. And he said they met as coaches.
Yeah. Now I don't know if you know that he met Jim Wolford when they were both in the Kansas City organization.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken. And
yeah, I think so. They were signed by Kansas City, and then they went somehow to the Instructional League together, I think. I have to get all the dates exactly correct,
right.
But that's what Jim was talking about. Because I think Jim met him when he was like, I think he said he was 20, and so Mark must have been, or he maybe 20 or 21, Mark was 19, I think. Anyway, they were very young when they met, and they were good friends for many years and used to talk about baseball all the time on the phone.
Well, Mark was managed by the same person, Whitey Herzog.
Right.
First in Kansas City and then with St. Louis. Or I might have reversed that in my mind. First with St. Louis and then it was Kansas City.
No, it was
first.
Kansas City first. Yep. And then St. Louis.
Did Mark talk at all about Whitey Herzog with you?
Not really. No, he didn't mention. I mean, he wrote. He said a lot about him in his books, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, no, he didn't really talk about other ball players that much or other managers with me. We were mainly focused on the stories that he. Did you read the piece about Gary Blaylock that he wrote?
I remember that, and I remember Gary Blaylock as a rookie with the New York Yankees was on the bubble in the 50s. And
and he had a very short major league career, but then became a coach and all kinds of other things. But he was very focused on him during the summer because he was writing this piece that is sort of a commemoration of him. So we would talk about players as they related to the people he was writing about. Sometimes he would tell stories, yarns about people and the things they got up to. But he didn't really mention Whitey to any great degree, but I know that he kept him in high esteem.
Good. Tell me a story or two from what would have been his fourth book. And
what will be his fourth book? Let's think about it as positive, moving towards completion.
Is this your first novel, your first book?
Yes, it's my first one. I've been working on it for a very long time, but encountering him really gave me a forward push. He really helped out a lot with it, even though he, didn't really help directly. Like I would ask some questions and he would answer them, but then he'd go off in this long, how he used to talk, right? He would get off in these long riffs and tangents and stuff, and he would start telling me stories. So I just took down a whole bunch of notes. So I was like, all right, I'm just absorbing all this stuff. And every time we talked on the phone, he would give me some more really valuable background information for my stuff, and then I would help him out with his stuff. But let me think about what story I could tell you that wouldn't be. Well, one of the main focuses of the book is his trip to Puerto Rico, where he played winter ball. And so there are several stories about that, and there's some very funny stories in there. But one of the things that is kind of the pivotal part of the book, from what my perspective is that he came down with a bone spur while he was in Puerto Rico. This was before he was really in the majors for good, and so he struggled with this pain in his elbow starting after the end of this Puerto Rico stint, because they pitched him so many innings. And he went to the Kansas City Royals folks, and they just downplayed it, and they did x-rays and couldn't find anything, because this was before the era of MRIs, right? So they didn't see anything, so they kind of just poo-pooed it and said, just, take a couple weeks off and come back. But it kept nagging and nagging and nagging, and finally he had his mother, who was a nurse, she contacted an orthopedist in I think it was Nashville. Anyway, so she got him in to see a real high-level person. They found the bone spur and took it out, and then he went through rehab with her. She worked with him on his arm and got him back.
She was terrific. Mark talked about her a lot. She was the first Head Start nurse in the world.
I didn't know that. I knew that she was a big Head Start nurse down in her area in Missouri.
Right. It may not have been the world. It may have been her area. But I think she was instrumental in bringing that program along. And I mentioned that in my description of every podcast I do. I ask people if they would take all their unused or lightly used children's books to the Head Start program, and I think that's Mark and I both agreed that that's the best way for me to help the Head Start program. Kids need to read, and
definitely,
and especially the people that need the Head Start the kids that need the Head Start program need to read more.
Right, exactly.
So I'll say it on the air now. If you can take and box up some books, take them down there, and simply contribute to making the world a better place.
I think she must have been. That's a great idea. Yep, I think she must have been one of the very first, because Head Start didn't come into being until the early '60s. I think it was under Johnson. I don't. Anyways, but it's a recent development, comparatively recent, anyway.
Sounds like that's recent. That's what it was. But the way you say it, the recent times, 1960, that was 60 years ago in itself.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm showing my age here.
Right. Well, you can't show it any more than I show mine. Let's put it that way. What did you do avocationally in life?
Oh, I was a editor, and I worked as a executive assistant to a bunch of CEOs and high mucky mucks, and wrote stuff for them. So, I was good at copy editing and putting things together. So that helped out a lot with Mark, because he needed somebody to kind of, just smooth things out and make sure that everything flowed properly. And but he was actually a very good writer, as just in itself. And I wanted to mention regarding the ADHD and the Head Start and everything, and reading. As I understand it from him, he didn't read very much at all until like his 40s, I think. I think that was when he got diagnosed with ADHD. And he struggled in school and had a really hard time, whereas his brother, Eric, did really well and went to college and became a successful sales executive. And so the two brothers, who I'm sure you read the stories that he wrote about, the two brothers together, were very much alike but also different. But he always kind of thought, I think, that he wasn't capable of doing the stuff that his brother did. But then when he took this medication, he started going the ADHD medication. He said that everything kind of opened up for him, and he suddenly started to want to read. So he started reading like everything he could find, basically. So that's like a big deal, because I was surprised that he could write so well, not having read anything for like most of his life, really. Because most writers come by it from reading from a very early age. So I was very impressed by his ability to put things together and to write. So, but he had discovered this very late in his life. So that's another admirable thing about him, is that he managed to open up that part of his personality and his talents at a late age, recreating himself, really.
you decided to write a novel before meeting Mark, and it was a pitching novel, pitching.
Oh, yeah.
How did you come to write it, and what inspired you initially to write this novel?
Well, I guess it was, I first came up with the characters, the main pitching character in college, so that was a bazillion years ago. I won't even think, you can guess when it was, since I already told you. Yeah. But I have the character in my mind.
Don't be sensitive about your age when you're talking to an old guy.
But this was many, many years ago. It's kind of scary looking back on it. So I had this character because I had read so much baseball stuff and so many baseball novels and Ring Lardner. You know Ring Lardner stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know me,
right.
Al.
Oh, yeah, and all the short stories. So I really loved all that stuff. So I just sort of one day started writing this character's autobiography, the as told to kind of stuff that is so popular. So I wrote a bunch of that, and then I put it aside, and I'd go back to it over the years, and I added more characters and added more stuff. And so it's been a long building thing, but it's just so funny that I encounter this guy who is very similar to the person that I invented, 30, 40 years ago. But anyway, He just had very similar personality. He's Mark was a very unusual character. He was very funny and witty and very good with words.
He did things his way.
Definitely.
You could tell him stuff, you could advise, you could observe, and he would note what you say. But and I that happened a few times in our limited relationship where we talk, and turns out he'd do something diametrically opposed to what we were talking about, and because I called him Lucky Lindy, he always landed on his feet that way. He always seemed to make the right. We forget Nutty Buddy, his invention, which was basically a glorified cup. But it was the way he marketed it was terrific. He was a great guy.
Can you say bad words on this podcast?
Oh yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, I just want to tell you the story that he felt quite relaxed talking to me. So we were talking one day about criticism, literary criticism, and how, what would people say about my book? What did people say about his book? And he said that, if people came up to him and said something about how he should have done this with his book, he should have written it this way, whatever, he'd just tell them, write your own fucking book. So I said, well, that's a good philosophy. I think I'll just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's the way he was. He was just like, he would do it his way. And actually, when I was editing his stuff, generally he just accepted everything that I suggested, small stuff. But every once in a while we'd run into one or two words that he really just wanted to use, even if they weren't quite right. So I'd say, all right, whatever you want to do, it's your book. You do what you want. So, but he was generally.
I want to ask you this question before I forget. Who influenced you in college? And what college was it? Was it CCNY?
No, I went to Bryn Mawr.
Oh, okay.
Katharine Hepburn territory,
Yes, born November 8th.
Oh, really? I didn't remember her birthday.
Well, Ed Kranepool, and I share the same birthday. That's why I say that.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
So I went to Bryn Mawr. I graduated. I had an English degree, but I don't know what you mean influenced in terms of like teachers or in college.
Yeah, how did you come to have the idea of writing a novel? How did that come about?
I guess I just had the character pop into my mind. He was originally based on Jerry Koosman, loosely, very loosely based. Just, the farm kid who comes to the city and kind of, because, Koosman used to get into, not really scrapes, but he would pull a lot of pranks on people. Do you remember the story about him pulling the prank on Seaver with the radio and everything?
That is a great story. I don't remember where I picked that story up or heard that, but that is precisely what I remember about Jerry Koosman's pranksterness.
Right.
He really got Seaver on that.
He did. he didn't tell him about it for years, apparently, until like he I think it was an interview show. He revealed it, and Seaver was completely pissed that it was him, but he didn't even know. He didn't even clue into it. But yeah, I have to. I'll find it. And
Seaver was just the opposite of personality-wise of Mark and Jerry Koosman.
I can imagine.
He was so freaking intense and so Tom Seaver this and Tom Seaver that.
Right.
And he had the right to be, because everybody has the right to be what they are. But as a human, when you are that way, you are most subject to being pranked.
Right. People can pull your tail.
Right, exactly. And
Koosman was not the kind of guy who would let that slide,
Right. And his number was retired by the Mets. We should mention that.
Right, I saw that.
Year or so. So.
Yep, and I guess there was a long delay in that, because the Wilpons wouldn't do it or something. I don't really know what happened with that. I haven't been keeping up with all the Mets backstage drama, but there was some drama.
Yeah, and there was also a lot of drama in Gil Hodges not being selected to the Hall for as long as it took him, and so quick story about Gil. You remember in 1969, or at least you remember reading about it if you were too young to remember the instance. Mm-hmm. But Cleon Jones fouled the ball off of his foot. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Gil added the shoe polish to it, but he really pissed off Earl Weaver in that World Series by doing it, by having it done. And Earl Weaver headed up the Veterans Committee for the Hall of Fame later on. And he found a way of not including Gil.
Really? Oh, I didn't hear that aspect of things.
Right. And not only that, but later on, Ted Williams, I'll tell you how he did it. Ted Williams was involved. I heard some story about Ted Williams being involved because Campanella was in the hospital or something. Right. But
there was some
that's
about how Campanella couldn't vote because he wasn't present, or there was some rule about how you had to be present, and Campanella was in the hospital and couldn't make it, and Williams said, the vote is invalid or something like that. Right. Which is kind of a scumbag thing to do.
Gil Hodges and Ted Williams both followed each other as manager of the Washington Senators.
Okay. Yeah, I never really thought about that, but I guess that's true.
And Gil held a grudge against Hodges. So all these things contributed to the long delay in recognizing Gil in the Hall of Fame. And
that's so good that it finally happened.
It is indeed. It is indeed.
And that his widow was able to be there. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. And not only that, but I'm privileged to have as a Facebook friend and a contributor to my podcast from time to time with Irene Hodges, his daughter.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah, that
Wonderful.
is very cool. So,
yeah.
what
and Mark
I'd
was
like
very
you to
supportive
do,
of women in baseball, actually. He used to talk to me about all the women that he knew who were in baseball, like Perry Barber and the woman who Nancy Finley, who wrote the book about the A's.
Yes, another one of my regulars on Comfortably Zoned, Nancy Finley.
Yep, and so he would talk about, he was very supportive of the whole idea and liked the fact that I was writing about baseball, and he said something a few times about how he tried to write in a way that would appeal to women readers, and he felt if he conveyed the stories to women readers in a way that they would enjoy, then he was successful.
Well, Mark was always trying to appeal to women on one level or another. He was not a shy person.
No.
And I remember when I first started doing podcasting, I befriended a woman, Vivian Gentry, who was the Gary Gentry's ex-wife.
Okay.
And right in the middle of getting to know her, she appeared on a few podcasts and trying to get Mark with her because there was some sort of a rift between them. And for a long time, I wanted to try to clear that up and make it okay, because they were two of my favorite people. And she had a massive stroke, and that put the kibosh on that. And
that's terrible.
now Mark is gone. Let me just tell you my fleeting thought, as mortality sucks.
Yeah, it does, and unfortunately, this has hit me harder than most deaths have in the recent years, because of how close we got and how we were working together on this project. And so it's just like kind of, my mind keeps going back to thinking like, he's going to call around this time, because he'd usually call around the same time, and then I'd be like, nope, sorry, he's not going to call. So it's all up to me now. But it is just really, really terrible to have happen so abruptly and so devastatingly. But yeah, mortality sucks. There's not much we can do about it, I guess.
Yeah, I know. Hard as I try.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it? Time's winged chariot. What is it? At my back, I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near.
Yeah.
Quote from some poet or other. I can't remember who.
Well, speaking of women writers, I always think of Dorothy Parker's quote, "Time flits. Oh shit."
Oh shit. Yeah. She was an interesting character too, actually. Oh, yes. Did Mark ever tell you, speaking of literary people, did he ever tell you about going to a party where Tennessee Williams was?
Oh no. Tell me that story.
Oh, did he ever tell you he was writing a play?
Mark was. No, he didn't.
No, well,
he didn't tell me that.
Because he just, I guess, started this summer. He started writing a play, and it was set in the bullpen, and it was going to be mostly focused on the dialogue and characters in the bullpen and the stands around it, and with the game going on in the background, which I thought was really a fascinating idea. And so he didn't know anything about writing a play. So I know something about writing a play. So we were talking about it, and I was sending him informational pages and stuff from Chekhov and stuff from Tennessee Williams, and trying to get him to see the different styles that they used in terms of the setting the scene and everything. And he just kind of said so go ahead.
I was going to say, if you're interested in the setting of the bullpen, there's a fellow by the name of Jim Brosnan who was.
Oh yeah, I know Jim. I mean, I know of him. We were reading the book together, actually, Mark and I.
Oh,
his book.
wow,
yep.
That's good.
Yeah, because he was. Yep.
Jim Brosnan was a bullpenner, and long before I can't think of, I blank on his name. Jim Bouton.
Sparky Lyle. Oh yeah. But
long before that, Jim Brosnan really captured the flavor of, and I'm like Walter Mitty. I got to know everything that goes on in baseball and went on, and that as a kid reading his two books, Pennant Race and A Long Season.
Yep.
I got an awful lot of what goes on in baseball from that. Yep. Those two books.
I particularly like The Long Season. That I would say that's one of the top 10 baseball books as far as I'm concerned. But the reason we got into talking about it with Mark, or Mark and I got into talking about it, was because he was writing this piece about Gary Blaylock, and there's a scene in the piece where he is with the Cardinals and Blaylock, and he is called in to pinch run for Stan Musial. And anyway, so we looked into the story of the game, and nowadays you can just access everything online, and you can get like pitch by pitch breakdowns of most of these games.
Scores,
so that was pretty amazing.
Right.
Like stuff you can get, like the weather at the time, and all this stuff. So we were trying to piece this story together, and Jim Brosnan actually he gave up a 2-run homer, I think, in the game, and the Cardinals ended up losing it. But I looked it up in the book, and he talks about the game in his book, that very game that Mark was telling the story about, that he heard from Gary Blaylock. He doesn't mention Gary in that particular context. He mentions him in other contexts. But anyway, so we were talking about Jim Brosnan. I sent Mark the book, and he read a little bit of it. I don't think he got too far into it, but he was very interested in the idea, because apparently Jim Brosnan was one of the first, maybe the first player to write his own book, as opposed to having a sports writer basically write it for him. And Mark was always proud of the idea that he wrote his own stuff. And, people would edit it, obviously, because everybody needs to be edited. but he would come up with everything himself. He would just write it all himself. So he was proud of that. He said something like maybe 5 or 6 other guys had done that in the whole history of baseball. So.
Leave us not forget that the great book by again I blank Jim Bouton
Ball 4.
Ball 4 was basically written by an editor, and a great one at that, Leonard Schechter.
Yeah, he was great, but still, it wasn't Bouton's book, really. I mean,
right.
He
took the notes, and Leonard made it into a book, and he gets very little credit in retrospect for his contributions to that book. Or maybe Bouton doesn't get enough credit for his contribution to Leonard's book, or how you look at it. But Leonard was, along with another Leonard, Leonard Cobbett.
Mm-hmm.
They both wrote bylines in. They had weekly columns, at least weekly, in the New York Post at that time, and this is back before the New York Post was. Let's put it this way: it was held in higher regard than it is now.
Right. They have a decent sports section.
Right. Great sports section.
Yep.
And so those two really contributed to my fandom.
Mm-hmm. I have several of Coppett's books. He wrote about the Mets quite often. You put together a few books about the Mets.
When I started getting into the business, as it were, of interviewing players, I had a local, and it's Cal State Hayward in Northern California, a local cable television show, and I would bring in folks from that golden era. And Leonard Coppett, who had moved from New York to Northern California, and I befriended him then. In the 70s, I was just looking for people to talk ball to. There's, before the internet, this, that, and the other thing. And I called Leonard and I welcomed him to California. And he remembered that when it came time for me to put a whole bunch of people together from that era. And he gave me an interview at that time, which turned out it was the first interview I did in the series. I had people like Hank Sauer and Fox, the manager of the Giants, and Joe DeMaestri came on, but Leonard was first, and he was so charming. And I will send you a link to that interview.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
And interviews I had with Mark on the podcast as well. I'll send you links to those. But Leonard Coppett, at the beginning, we were talking about the Post, and I said, I don't know if you realize that I worked for the Post as well. I was a delivery boy when I was in high school.
Oh,
the New York Post. And Leonard says, he was so quick-witted, he says, well, I'm sure you played a much bigger part in this than I did, just getting the paper out there. But he was such a self-effacing guy. And
that sounds great. Wow. He sounds like a really nice guy.
Yeah.
As opposed to some sports writers I could mention.
Oh, yeah.
I won't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to mention about Boughton. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you'd be welcome to mention anything you want. That's what a podcast is about.
Okay.
So if anything you want to get off your chest, good, bad, and indifferent,
all right,
I'd
cool.
like to know.
Great. Well, I said bad words, so that's a big plus.
Well, fucking A, it is.
Fucking A, right. So Mark and I talked about Boughton a few times because I don't think he'd read the book, Ball 4, but, and of course I've read it several times. It's a great book, and it's hilarious. But it does have a kind of a sour quality to it where, it's kind of a bitterness throughout, I thought. And that's something that Mark really wanted to avoid in his books, and we talked about that because he said that he could easily have gone in that direction and talked about all the bad stuff that happened and all the grudges and the fights and the problems and betrayals and everything. But he decided that he didn't want to do that. He wanted to focus on the positive aspects and try to be light and funny about it because he didn't see the point in putting all the dirty laundry out there for everybody to pour over, And I respected that. I thought that was a pretty cool thing to do because he obviously had some stuff that he was unhappy about, but he didn't want to air it, and he just decided to choose to be positive. And there are a couple of instances where he
walked on the sunny side of the street.
Yep, he did. He always was a very sunshiny character, even though I think that there were depths that were not so sunny, but he didn't really show them, and he wanted to make everybody happy, when he interacted with them. So he wanted to write stories that were fun and still kind of a little bit not edgy, but, just sort of mischievous, I guess, but not anything bad. There were a couple of instances where he said, like in the third book, he talked about his experiences coaching and how a couple of them weren't all that great in terms of the management. But he said he really tried not to get too far into that because it's just like there's no point in rehashing all negative stuff. And that's one of the things that I remember about Boughton's book is that it really did leave me feeling kind of like, like maybe he wasn't such a pleasant character to know, or maybe he just wasn't very much fun to be around. But he was obviously very smart, and Schechter did a great job of conveying the ball player's voice in his book and telling these stories. But I think, if I respected what Mark wanted to do with his books and wanted to keep them being upbeat.
Mark also downplayed the severity of his illnesses, and you'd ask him how you doing, and he'd always say quite well,
Yep.
as opposed to, well, I had this procedure and I had that.
Right.
And when we talked about even the procedures, which he had some stuff done 2 or 3 years ago, which was incredibly arduous and incredibly risky to his life, and this, that, and the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
He downplayed it and always came back with "How you doing?" That kind of thing. I miss him. And
I miss him too. He was just really fun to talk to every time, even if he wasn't, feeling well. He managed to make me feel good, and to end the conversation on an up note. So that was really it was really sad to lose him because he was such a creative guy. Oh, I didn't finish telling you about the play. Anyway, so he wrote these like few pages of dialogue, and I was reading the dialogue, and I thought, well, this is good dialogue, but it is kind of flat because it doesn't really tell you much more about baseball dugout stuff than we already know. And I suggested, to him, the thing that is most intriguing, what's most fun about your books is your voice when you're telling the stories, and that you're telling them from your point of view and you're making your comments and all this stuff. And I think that's one of the things that people like about your books. So why don't you create a narrator character that is kind of loosely based on you, where you can sort of kibitz with the audience and talk to the people on stage and talk to the audience and try to liven things up a little bit with that. I think that would add a little more pizzazz to the story. So he thought, oh, all right. And then he really got into it, as you might expect. He really inhabited that part. And so he wrote some more pages, and then he came back one morning and said, "I'm now the guardian angel of the bullpen." I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm going to be an angel. I'm going to be all in white and have white wings and a white cap, and I'm going to fly in from the wings." And I was like, "All right, Mark, whatever you want." Whatever you want to do is fine. But it was just so hilarious that he wanted to do this. And so we wrote like maybe 18, 19 pages of this play very late in the summer before he really started getting ill. But it would have been really fun to finish up with him because he just had he got such a kick out of it. He named the catcher character Gino after Gene Tennis. And
Gino Tenacci is a matter of fact.
Gino Tenacci, yep. And he talked a lot about Gino, and he had a young college boy pitcher named Ron. Guess who that was based on?
I'm blanking.
Ron Darling. It was based on.
Oh, okay.
So, it's just all fun stuff. It was all really fun, lighthearted stuff. But he did it as a kind of a switcheroo from working on his own.
The proceeding has been a comfortably zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone, Happy trails.